G'day everybody, my name is Elliot Waters and you're listening to the Dysregulated podcast. As always, thank you for tuning in. So today's episode, I'm bringing it back, DBT skills, Dialectical Behaviour Therapy. So today we're going to look at the pros and cons skill that you learn in therapy, which is a really good one. It's very functional, has great utility. I use it myself, and that's why I want to get it out there because I think it may help a few of you guys with some of your decision making that is coming up as well. Because these skills, although DBT has been developed primarily for people with borderline personality disorder and severe emotional dysregulation, a lot of these skills can help anybody enrich their life and make things a bit easier and head in a direction that you really want to go. So you don't need to have BPD or a mental illness to use these skills because they are very handy no matter the situation. So let's have a look. DBT skills, pros and cons. If you want to go back and listen to some more DBT skills after this, I've also done an episode on radical acceptance, which is a huge one for me. Oh man, that's why I did it first. And also wise mind. And we're going to touch on the wise mind skill in this as well. So what is the pros and cons skill in DBT? Well, it's a distress tolerance skill. So it helps people make wise, balanced decisions. So especially when dealing with intense emotions, urges, or impulsive behaviors. So you can see the BPD influence there. But again, intense emotions, urges, and impulsive behaviors happens to all of us. So unlike everyday pros and cons lists, this skill focuses, this is huge, on short-term versus long-term consequences. It helps you zoom out a bit, have a look at the overall picture, and helps individuals pause before acting on urges that might be harmful. So how is it used in DBT? So it is often used when facing emotionally charged decisions, like whether to engage in self-destructive behavior, avoid a difficult situation that does not need avoiding, or acting impulsively. So the skill involves writing down, we'll do an example of this in a minute, the pros of acting on the urge, the cons of acting on the urge, the pros of resisting the urge, and the cons of resisting the urge. So the key difference from a typical pros and cons list is that it focuses on, as I said, urges and emotional regulation, not just logical decision-making that maybe you'll see in CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy. It acknowledges that emotions are powerful and that they don't always lead to the best choices. So how can it be used in real life? So it can be used to manage impulsivity. So it helps the individual pause before reacting emotionally. For example, sending an angry text, binge eating, or engaging in self-harm. It can be used with addiction recovery. Can be used to weigh the effects of using versus staying sober, again, looking long-term at those consequences. It can also be helped with interpersonal conflicts. So it helps assess whether expressing anger or staying silent might be the better option. And avoidance and procrastination encourages evaluating the short-term relief of avoidance versus the long-term benefit of action. So, for example, someone struggling with self-harm might write, pros of self-harm, immediate relief, numbs emotions, okay? The cons of self-harm, worsens long-term emotional pain and there's a potential for injury. That doesn't sound very good. Pros of not self-harming, builds resilience, leads to long-term healing. I like that. Cons of not self-harming, we'll have to sit with uncomfortable emotions for a while, and that is a tough one. And for me, on that sort of topic, that's the big one that gets me always. It's sitting with those emotions. It's very difficult. So cognitive behavioural therapy, the difference really is DBT pros and cons is emotion focused and helps with urges in distressing situations, whereas CBT decision making is thought focused and helps challenge distorted beliefs. So the CBT stuff's really working on that logical left side of the brain, the left brain, whereas DBT tries to incorporate the emotional content of the right side of the brain and the logical thinking of the left, put them together and see what we come up with. And that's why it's linked to wise mind, because that's exactly what wise mind does. It links both sides of the brain together to make informed decisions. So the research says that this stuff works. It's not just me saying it. So Marsha Linehan, the creator of DBT, highlighted pros and cons as essential for impulsive behaviours, especially in borderline personality disorder and overall emotional dysregulation. Studies on DBT show that distress tolerance skills, which includes pros and cons, there's plenty more, we're going to go through them, reduce self-harm, emotional reactivity, and impulsivity in people with BPD, depression, and addiction. So that's pretty cool because we actually want this stuff to work, and it does. The research suggests definitely that it does. And there's more, because the neuroscience evidence suggests that writing out pros and cons activates the prefrontal cortex, improving logical decision-making when emotions are running high. And like anything you do, the more you do it, the stronger those neural connections get. So the prefrontal cortex lights up and it starts thinking, hey, this is a different way to do things. Let's create this sort of nerve pattern that follows this, and let's see what we go with it. And if it's a good result, which it should be, that reinforces that neural sort of activity that's going on. Then all of a sudden doing pros and cons is a little bit easier and becomes a little bit more natural. So if you've been following the DBT skills series, you would know, first off, that I haven't done one of these in a while. I apologize, but they're coming back. But as I said, you might remember the concept of wise mind. I would recommend listening to it. Great episode. So wise mind is that balanced state where we use both the emotional mind, and the reasonable mind to make decisions that align with our values. And the pros and cons skill is essentially a shortcut to getting to that wise mind feeling. So when we're caught in distress or avoidance, we tend to lean too far into the emotional mind, acting purely on feelings, urges, or impulses. My hand is in the air, that is me. Whereas on the other hand, the one that's still down, if we try to be overly logical and dismiss emotions completely, that's the reasonable mind, which doesn't always reflect what we truly need. So you need a bit of both. So using pros and cons helps us pause and consider both the emotional urges and logical reasoning that's going into this state that we're experiencing. So it gives the emotional mind a chance to express itself, which is important, but also brings in the reasonable mind to weigh the long-term consequences. And that's what helps us land in the wise mind zone, the space where we can make the best choice for ourselves. So using pros and cons to manage my job application anxiety. All right, let's have a look at a real example here of me going through pros and cons for something that I'm telling you is a big issue in my life at the moment. So let's see what we come up with. All right, so I've got this job application. I know I should be applying for it. I've been saying I need a new job for ages now. You guys know this. But the moment I open the application, I feel it, this wave of anxiety and self-doubt, the imposter syndrome, all of that inner critic stuff just washes over me and floods me out. So what if I don't get it, I ask myself? What if this just proves that I'm not good enough? What if I fumble the interview and they think I'm a joke? How about we don't do that? Before I know it, my brain is already finding ways to avoid this whole thing. So you're negative. Straight away, automated response is negative. It's a protective factor, but it's dialed up too high. We need to dial it down and get some logic in there and see what we come up with. So I think to myself, maybe I'll just apply later on. I'll do it later, Maybe I don't even want this job. Maybe this isn't the one, my dream job. And then instead I go scroll my phone instead. It's not good. That's what happens. I get on my phone and go, you know what? Forget that. I'm not doing it. I'm going to concentrate on something else. And we all do this for different reasons. But deep down, I know that this is an avoidance pattern that I know all too well. If I don't apply, I'll be stuck in the same loop, making the same podcast episodes, losing listeners because yous are all sick of me complaining about not having a new job, as well as feeling frustrated, useless, and then regretting it later. So instead of spiraling, which is easy to do, and there's plenty of thought process there that could do it, but instead of spiraling, I grab a piece of paper, or you can do it on the computer in your notes app or whatever in Word, and do a pros and cons exercise. So the first step is write out the pros and cons. So what I do, I split the page into two columns, right? Option 1 is avoiding the job application. Option 2 is applying for the job. And then obviously the consequences that go with that. The cons of, it's really not that technical, but it is very important. I want to get this right. So option 1 is avoiding the job application. So under that heading, I have the pros of avoiding and then also the cons of avoiding in the other column. So the second option is applying for the job. So the pros of applying and the cons of applying for the job underneath in those two columns. So this is what I'd be writing out. So the pros of avoiding are no risk of rejection. Oh yeah. No stress or pressure, sort of, only in the short term. Anyway, feeling safe in the moment. Yep, because it's a protective measure. And I don't have to face that fear of failure, even though that doesn't really work because I think about it all the time. So although that's in there, it's a very short bit of relief that I get. So those pros aren't very strong already. The cons of avoiding is still unemployed and unhappy, still making these same episodes, reinforcing my avoidance cycle, feeling like garbage later for not trying, and there's no chance of a new opportunity, which I desperately want. So the second option was applying for the job. So the pros of applying. So there's a chance I could actually get it. That'd be good. And even if I don't get it, it's good practice moving forward. It proves I'm taking action instead of staying stuck. So that gets that feeling of empowerment and, hey, I'm working towards a better future. The dopamine starts flowing and then all of a sudden this is becoming easier. And it's also one step towards potential change. The cons of applying are that I might not get it and everything that will go with it. The rejection will hurt big time and it will reinforce those thoughts. I'm just not good enough. And I'll have to put in effort and focus on the application. That's a given, but very difficult, especially when you have ADHD. These job applications, I'm trying to make them personalized for each role and each company I'm applying for. For anybody, there's a lot of effort and focus has to go into that. But with ADHD, it is very, very taxing. But, it's not enough. Got to keep going. So what do we learn from this exercise? So you look at the list and I don't know, to me, it's pretty obvious that the worst case scenario of applying, which is I don't get the job, is still better than the guaranteed outcome of not applying, which is I stay stuck and don't have a new job. So if I avoid it, I avoid discomfort for now. But like I said, it's only very short-lived because I'm constantly thinking about this sort of stuff. But then also if I avoid it, I'm avoiding progress and that stops the dopamine from flowing. So avoidance feels easy short-term, but long-term, remember we're looking at short, but then the long-term consequences. So it feels easy, avoidance short-term, but long-term, it just keeps me trapped and I'm still in this negative cycle. So I need to remind myself it's all right to feel anxious, but avoiding this won't help. I don't have to be perfect, believe it or not. Just applying is a win. Little wins, Elliot, little wins. And even if I don't get it, I will learn from this experience. So next, we got to take some action. It's all good to write this stuff down and come to that conclusion, but we've actually got to do something about it. So what I do, I apply anyway, not because I'm feeling magically confident or things have changed that much or because, it's not that I've flicked this switch and it's just happening, but the reason is because I know deep down, and it's not even that deep, it's pretty surface level as well, because this is such a big issue for me, that I know that avoiding it will make me feel worse in the long run. And that's the power of the pros and cons in DBT. It helps you step outside the emotional, overwhelmed state and make a decision that aligns with your values, what you're aiming for, what your objectives are moving forward, and not just urges. So it looks at the emotions in the short term, but then looks at things much more broadly for the longer term. So pros and cons connects to emotional regulation. This is how it does it. So many people think of a pros and cons list as just rational decision making, but in DBT, it's about emotional regulation, which is something the Dysregulated podcast needs lots of. So the skill helps slow down impulsive reactions so we can make decisions with both emotion and logic. Again, wise mind. So this isn't about suppressing emotions, but about balancing them. Validating feelings while still choosing what's best in the long term. Yes, this is a tough process. Yes, I have ADHD, so doing these resumes maybe is a little bit more difficult than some, but at the same time, long term, this could change my life for the better. This is what we need to be doing. Let's go. So it's important to note that your emotions aren't the enemy here. They just don't always have the full picture. They're just looking a bit too short term. The scope is too narrow. Got the blinkers on. Pros and cons helps us take a step back and decide with clarity, not just with instincts, although both are important. So when would you use this skill in real life? So here are some times where it would be very beneficial potentially to use pros and cons. So when you feel stuck in indecision, should I do X or Y? What on earth should I be doing? Write it down, figure it out. When you're about to act impulsively, so for example, again, sending those risky text messages, quitting something like a job, self-harm, overspending, etc. We know all about impulsivity. When you're feeling avoidant, for example, wanting to skip therapy, which I don't do anymore, which is great, and not applying for that job, that one's the problem. And when making a big life decision, so for example, moving house, ending a relationship, or quitting a job. So it's important if we need to make this a habit. So I would encourage you to do what I do, which is keep a notebook or put it on your phone in notes. I prefer to write it down. I'm old school. Or even a whiteboard. I've tried the whiteboard pros and cons. That works too. So grab something that you can do these pros and cons lists sort of real quick in the moment. Boom, let's have a look at things properly. Okay, I know the best way to move forward. Let's go. So whether that's in a notebook, on the phone, on a whiteboard, whatever, when those moments arise that we just went through, a quick pros and cons check can be very, very helpful. And if you've got the tools on you, which is a pen, piece of paper, or your phone or whatever, it can be very, very powerful in moving forward and making sure you make the right decisions. So there's some mistakes when using this skill. So sometimes there is the urge to only list the immediate short-term effects. So example, I feel, if I skip therapy today, I'll feel relieved. But what about long-term? Being too black and white, and this is especially difficult for those with BPD. This is why this is so helpful for BPD. So it's not about labeling something as good or bad, but just looking at the full picture, looking at the facts, taking the emotion out of it. Let's just look at this properly and not be too extreme in our ways of thinking, that black and white thinking. And also people, and myself included at times, have let emotions dominate the list. So if the emotions are saying, I don't want to apply for this job, it is easy to skew the list towards justifying avoidance. So we're not here to justify, we're not here really to justify anything. There's no justification going on. It's just stating the facts, using wise mind, having a look at the big picture, and then figuring out what the best way forward is. So the goal here isn't to convince yourself to do something. It's to make a fully informed decision where your emotions and logic both get a say. Wise mind. Let's talk about wise mind a little bit more. So the balance between the emotional mind and reasonable mind, that is, or the thinking mind, there's a few different names, but overall that is the wise mind, the balance. Pros and cons is essentially a shortcut to getting into the wise mind when we're stuck in distress or avoidance. So for example, with my job, the emotional mind might be saying, I can't do this, I'll just get rejected, I should avoid it. Whereas my thinking mind might say, logically, the worst that happens is I don't get the job, but it's just a piece of paper. Who cares? It doesn't mean anything. I should just apply, all right? Okay, there's actually a little bit of emotion in that, but that's the general gist of it. It's, applying for these jobs, it's not the end of the world if I don't get them. I should just give myself the chance. But if I just listen to that emotional mind, I'll avoid doing the application and stay stuck. So although I'll feel in the very, very short term a little bit better, a little bit stress-free, don't have to do all that extra work, long term I'm stuck, and that's a big problem. But if I only listen to the reasonable thinking mind, I might try and push through without acknowledging that I do have these self-doubts and anxiety, which are very, very real. It's not about pretending none of that stuff's going on. It's accepting it, but then moving forward. So that's where pros and cons comes in. So it helps weigh both sides and find the wise mind. So I'm acknowledging my fear, which is the emotional mind, but also recognizing that avoiding this will only make me feel worse in the long run. That's the thinking mind. The middle path, which is the wise mind, is realizing, yep, this is scary, but I can handle it. Applying is still the best move. So it's not about just making a choice. It's about helping us see the bigger picture and not acting on instinct alone. It slows down the reaction time of making decisions so we can respond in a way that actually supports our goals and values. So I do invite people to try this skill if you need it, possibly today. So if you've got a decision you're struggling with right now, big or small, try this pros and cons exercise, write it out, put it on your phone, whatever. Take a step back and see what comes up. Be objective as possible, and see what comes up. And if you've got any questions, you can, of course, message me on Instagram at elliot.t.waters, and I would love to hear if this skill has helped you here today. So that's all for today's episode. If you found this useful, please share it with someone who might need it. And if you're enjoying the series, let me know what DBT skills, if you've got a bit of an introduction to it already, you'd like me to cover next. But the general way I'm doing this is I'm doing the skills that have really helped me, doing them first, because I know they work, because I am the example. And there's lots of these skills that I'm going to go through that are very, very helpful, but pretty easy. Like that one's pretty easy. Get a piece of paper, write down the pros and cons of doing it versus not doing it, and then having a look at it broadly and thinking about, down the track a bit further than just what's happening in the now and going, oh yeah, okay, there is going to be a bit of short-term pain, but it can be potential for lots of long-term gain. And that's the bit I want to focus on. Thank you, Pros and Cons. Thank you, Dysregulated Podcast, for sorting that out for me. So there you go. So that is DBT, Dialectical Behaviour Therapy, Pros and Cons. Sorry it's been so long since I've done an episode on these DBT skills, but we're back now in a big, big way because, as I've said at the start, I know how important these skills have been for me and how important they can be for you too. You don't need a mental illness. You don't have to have borderline personality disorder for this stuff to work. This is great in general for making decisions and sticking to the bigger picture. That's what it's all about. All right. Thank you, everybody. Again, if you've got any questions, message me on Instagram at elliot.t.waters. If you're enjoying the show, feel free to like, subscribe, give the show a great rating because, let's face it, this is free therapy. So obviously this deserves 5 stars. And you can share it around with your mates too that might find this helpful. And as I said, you can follow me on Instagram at elliot.t.waters. All right, until next time, thanks everybody. Have a good one.